Recently on his YouTube channel, Destiny, the famous streamer, has said that he believes if he had to pick a religion, he would pick Christianity, and here is why. Now, full disclosure, I'll just say this from the outset. Destiny doesn't know a lot about Christianity. And I'm not saying that to be like belittling or anything like that, but he's about to make some claims, and we're going to have to react to a lot of those claims about Christianity, and they're just going to be evidence of a lot of ignorance. But it's still amazing that he chooses Christianity, and I want to highlight that too.
If you were forced to choose a religion out of all of them, which one would you choose? I'm impartial. You can't ask me that fairly because I was raised Catholic, right? Personally, I'm impartial to Christianity.
Now, just full disclosure, Destiny is not religious anymore.
I think that Jesus embodies probably the best values in terms of like treating people selflessly, in terms of doing things for others, in terms of like defending your faith, but also like being sacrificial for other people. Like I just think Jesus strikes a really good balance of that. Old Testament shit, I don't know if Jewish people study the Old Testament like we did. Old Testament shit is really brutal. That God seems. And then Islamic stuff just seems like it has a lot of potential problems too, where they all seem. I feel like Christianity strikes a good balance, at least of the three Abrahamic religions, in terms of like being a selfless, compassionate, caring person.
Okay, so he starts off not too bad. Again, there is some problems with what he said, but he says, I think Jesus strikes the best balance. And this is typically what people do. Richard Dawkins kind of does the same thing. He goes, I think a lot of what Jesus says, the Sermon on the Mount, it's very nice. It's very beautiful. Lots of nice things Jesus said. Now, he has problems with Jesus, but Destiny here is saying, no, Christianity or what Jesus does or what he represents, I mean, that's just really beautiful stuff. It's really beautiful stuff, and he's very kind, and he's selfless, he's sacrificial of his own self. Again, says lots of nice things about Jesus, but then he says the God of the Old Testament is crazy, essentially, and he likes to punish people. And this is a very common stereotype that people have who don't actually read the Bible. I've been doing a lot of talking about this, some podcasting on it, some preaching about it, but the idea that God is just this mean, angry God in the Old Testament, and then Jesus is all nice, bad cop, good cop, that's an unbiblical, that's an ignorant reading of Scripture, just plain and simple. And I mean that respectfully, but it's just a really ignorant reading of Scripture. Did God punish people physically? Yes, God had his reasons for that. There was a lot of wickedness, a lot of immorality. God wasn't just temperamental. God wasn't excited to punish people. It wasn't the case that God just couldn't wait to punish people, not even close whatsoever. God had to be very severe, very strict, because, again, they needed to stay alive for Christ to come into the world. But at the same time, every instance of God's wrath on them is also an instance of his mercy, because he had the right to, on a moral level, as God, to punish them way worse than what he ever did. While you're watching, like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon. The link is in the description below. Let's get back to the video.
Christ is king. Why not Judaism? I don't know. That God just seems really mean. Like, there's like a whole book with like Job where Satan is like, I bet Job like won't be holy to you, and God's like, well, I'm going to torture this guy for like decades and see what happens. Or God is like, go stab your kid in the throat because I told you to, and the guy's like, okay, I'll go do it. That's not Job. I don't even remember the names.
So he's trying to reference Abraham and Isaac, and he doesn't even remember the name. So he goes, that's crazy. The fact that God would have this bet with Satan, that's crazy.
Or Moses. Moses spends, it's symbolic numbers. I don't know if you know this, but all the numbers in the Old Testament are symbolic. They're not real. So like when it says, I think 40 is supposed to be a number, 3 is perfection, 40 is a number of like trials and suffering. I think 6 is evil. So like when somebody says somebody wandered the desert for 40 years, or when somebody says something like somebody like wept for 40 days, or it's because they're going through like a trial of some sort. Moses led his people.
So he's saying, he's talking about Hebrew numerology, and he's right. And some of the meanings to the numbers he's correct about as well. However, he's saying that the actual time spent is not real. It's always symbolic, and that's not true. The actual time spent, I mean, if you look at the wilderness wanderings, the 40 years, there are generations that are passing. It's not just, and they wandered the wilderness for 40 years, and then it just keeps on going, and the same people are alive. No, there are generations dying out. That's what the Bible records. There are, again, 40 years worth of people. In fact, the original generation of people who left Egypt didn't make it into the Promised Land, in part because of the passing of 40 years. So the idea that it's just always symbolic whenever those numbers are mentioned is not true.
Out of Egypt, through the Sinai Peninsula, through the desert, for 40 years. and then he gets mad and he hits a rock twice, and God keeps him out of Israel. That's brutal. That's brutal, man. Is that a comment?
So it's brutal that he disobeyed God and got punished for it by not being able to enter the promised land. That is brutal. I mean, if you want to point to brutality, there are some instances of God's severity you can point to. But the idea that that is God being brutal on Moses, especially given the fact that God allowed Moses to see it from afar, even though Moses had disobeyed God and had disrespected God's holiness, which is something that God could not let stand on such dire circumstances like them wandering in the wilderness. God literally buried Moses. God literally buried Moses. So the idea that God and Moses just ended off on terrible terms and God was just so brutal to him at the end is nonsense too.
Only agreed on a thing, that the numbers are metaphorical.
I mean, are we really going to make the argument that God is not within his right as God to punish his own people? Again, the idea that that's brutal is just really ignorant.
It should be, unless Jewish people are delusional. Wait, are there any Jew dudes in here? You must. In Christianity, we were taught to read those numbers as metaphorical. That's why like 666 is like 3 sixes is like the perfect evil. What are the other numbers? 40 is trial and tribulation. 12 might also represent perfection or something, because there were 12 apostles or something. I think I'd have to go and check, but I'm pretty sure the numbers are all supposed to be like symbolic.
So he's going to do this for a while and kind of wonder about that. And then there's going to be some questions about Moses and the rock and this, that, and the other. But it's amazing to think about how, and he's reacting, by the way, to this podcast that's happening where there's this guy named Sneeko who has adopted Islam. He's a Muslim. And he's constantly talking to other Muslims and asking them for help on Muslim apologetics and how to defend it. So Destiny is reacting to that and now discussing which religion is the best. It's amazing that he says Christianity, though. Again, it's awesome to see how secular people can look at things honestly enough and say, yes, this is definitely the best religion. This is definitely the most moral religion. If I had to live under one of these systems, it's got to be Christianity because the other ones don't even come close. And that is a beautiful thing it's a beautiful conclusion to come to. And a lot of the times it is the seed for people fully coming to Christianity later on. I did a video about Ayan Hirsi Ali from Muslim to atheist and now has adopted Christianity, an activist and an author who's good friends with Richard Dawkins, the world's greatest atheist alive, I would say. I reacted to her defending her decision to adopt Christianity to Richard Dawkins' face, and part of her reasoning was, this is the accumulated wisdom of humankind that we need God and we should respect that wisdom. And that is definitely the best system. Christianity is the best system that the world has for pursuit of God. It is the most well-founded in evidence. But again, when you see it applied, when you see it truly applied, it is the most moral. It has produced the best society the world has ever seen in the West under these morals as well. So though he is really ignorant on a lot of parts of Scripture, his conclusion is pretty incredible. But let me know what you think. Is Christianity the best religion? Is there one that's better than that? Is Destiny Steven Bonnell? Is he wrong? Let me know what you think. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and consider supporting on Patreon. God bless you. The link is in the description below. God bless you. Talk to you soon. Goodbye.